Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a leaf cluster for your slow stitching. In the video, I'll show you how I make my leaf cluster, some variations on each of the leaves, and then applications, basically how I use it in my work. I'll give you an example and a soon-to-be example. So let's get started. So here is the leaf cluster that we're going to make. You can vary it accordingly by choosing different colors, different patterns of fabric, using different stitching, choosing to use buttons or not, and then also the color of buttons. And then sometimes I like to tuck a little piece of lace underneath the leaf cluster because I really like the contrast between the burlap and the delicate lace. But in this case, I left it off in case I didn't want to use it. So that's the leaf cluster. At the end of the video, I'll show you some ways that I actually use them in my work. But let's get started creating it. It's kind of a multi-layered piece and it's very simple to make, but there are lots of different layers. So I like to start with just a piece of felt. This is a piece of craft felt, not quality wool felt, but craft felt, and that works out very well. And then I found this beautiful fabric scrap that I had that not only had flowers, but it had the green and a little gold. So my leaf is a little unconventional. It's not a green leaf or a red and orange foliage leaf, but it'll work really well. I have some burlap. I have different colors of burlap, but I went with this dark because I like the contrast between that yellow and the dark. So these are all different ways that you can vary the piece and make it your own by choosing these carefully, these different objects, or even just using what you have. And it's very serendipitous the way it comes along. Now, when I went through my buttons, I was originally looking for a yellow button, but this popped out and it's kind of the same shape as this. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. So that will work out well. Then I have a couple of pieces of lace here to use. I think I'll show you how I incorporate the lace because I've already showed you how I can leave it out. So the first thing you want to do is decide on what size leaves you want. I like to use 3 leaves, but this can be totally varied and you can use 2 or 1 or even more if you want. So I just kind of cut the shape. I like kind of a pointed teardrop shape. And basing it on the piece I want to use with the burlap, I like to hide some of the burlap, but have some of it poking through. So this shape, or even a little smaller, would work well. And then I'll cut 3 leaves, approximately this shape and size. I can trace it with my scissors and just cut around, or just eyeball it. And you can certainly make different shaped leaves. There's no 2 leaves that are identical anyway. They just have similar characteristics. So once you have your leaves, it's time to make the topping of your leaf with your fabric. So for here, I just like to cut my fabric approximately the width that I'm going to need it to make my leaf. And then I just cut my leaf. And I like the yellow, in this case, of the felt to be showing through. So I make my topping piece considerably smaller. And again, I just kind of echo that shape. If it's too small, I'll cut another piece. And so I have 2 little pieces here to use. And see how that makes the yellow of the leaf peek out? This might be a little small to use, or it might be just fine. This is how you can vary it. In this case, I want to try and use that rounded piece. So I'll just cut around that. And I have my 3 leaves. To assemble them, I just take some thread. You can use any number of strands. I'm using all 6 here. And I just chose a dark green. It's a little darker than the green here. And here's where you make your veining pattern. I like to start about 1/3 of the way up, and I do a back stitch, or maybe even 2. And this helps me to hide the little knot on the back of my piece. And then I'll come forward and just stitch some more veining here. You can use as many or as few stitches as you want. Keep them as tight together or loose. That's up to you. You can even make decorative stitches additionally. And I like to go about the distance of that fabric top. You can choose to make some veining on the sides. It's up to you. I happen to like it just like that. So I'll knot it on the back And then I'll repeat that procedure with the remaining 2 leaves. So I've completed those leaves. You can just see I stitched just across the top. I left some of the leaves off center, I centered some. This gives me a nice little way that I can add them to a cluster with a little bit of variation. I wanted to show you just some alternatives at this point using those felt leaves. So here are some felt leaves with different color felt. They're all acceptable colors. And here's just a monotone leaf where I stitched down the center. So I can use that, substitute that in one of my clusters if I wanted. I did a little more in-depth stitching on this one. Again, I didn't put fabric on top, but I just did some leaf veining. So this gives a different look, but it'll still be appropriate in my work. And so here are 3 additional leaves with pattern fabric, different fabric on these, and I just stitched across the leaf. So it just gives you a different feel. Now you can combine colors, you don't have to stick to the same colors that I did, or not. The next step is we're going to attach them in a little cluster. You could stop there and just use this cluster in your work. Here I did a cluster with 1 pattern fabric on top of the leaf, 1 plain leaf, and 1 stitched leaf. And here I did 2 fabric leaves and 1 stitched leaf. So you can see there's just so many variations to use here. So now what I want to do is just make a quick stitch to combine my leaves together. And I'm noticing on this leaf that I think I want to just trim it ever so slightly. Just round it out a bit. And then I can just figure out the formation that I want. And I kind of like that nicely spread out. So where it overlaps, I'll just take my thread again and stitch just a couple stitches to hold it in place. Just stitch up and down. And again. So now we can assemble our cluster with the burlap. I take the burlap and I decide kind of where I want to put it. And I kind of like it hanging off the top here, so I have a little frame. But before I attach it, I can decide if I want to use some lace. And I really do like the way that looks. So I'll cut a little lace here, just a very rough cut. If I make it hang over my piece, I can use this in my work, or I can trim it later. So I think I'll keep it just like that. I might even scoot this down a little further. I could have used this lace if I wanted. So I'm pleased with that. And then I think I'll take the button and put it up here ultimately. But right now I'll just take my thread that's knotted and I'll come up from behind and I'll attach the leaf, and I'm stitching through the leaf, the lace, and the burlap. And I'll just give it a few little stitches here and there. I can even carry out and continue this little veining. And the same thing on this leaf. Now I like to pull up the leaf and just give a couple of quick stitches underneath the leaf to attach the lace to the burlap, just in a few places. And as you can see, the burlap starts to unravel, so you just got to treat that gingerly. Do another little stitch here. And one more stitch on this side. And then lastly, I'll take my button, decide where I want it, and I like to stitch up through the felt first. Then I can just attach my button. Like that. Maybe one more go through. I'll knot off my thread on the back. And then I have a little beautiful leaf cluster that I can use in my work, and I can alter it further by changing the lace adding additional lace underneath if I wanted. Or here. But I have a little cluster that I can use in my work. But let me show you how I use this. So I already showed you my little cluster without the lace, but here I'd use that cluster and I'd start a tag. I can use it like this. So that's one application. The other application is to make it the focal point of your work. So here I have a slow stitched piece that I started, and before I added my leaf cluster, I had just had the shapes stitched down to this beautiful fabric backing, this blue and brown and green backing. So my color scheme was going to introduce yellow. The last minute I decided I'd use this leaf cluster. And to coordinate it, I found a button that matched those blues. Now the leaf cluster doesn't match the yellow, but it does have a little yellow in it, so it worked out really well. So there are different ways you can use this piece in your work. And it's also a fun piece. It kind of echoes fall to me, autumn, or just the beautiful shape of leaves. So that's how I create a leaf cluster. It's a fun autumn accessory, but leaves are just absolute. You can use them at any time. They're just beautiful and well shaped. You can get so many variations in this technique by changing the shape of the leaf, using different pattern fabric, or no fabric at all. I hope you've enjoyed this project, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And please consider becoming a paid member of my channel for behind-the-scenes content and extra video footage. Thanks for joining me today.